While some people don't like sports, it's a fact that sports teams form a huge part of an area's culture. Along with the entire state being glued to the TV for a couple hours every Saturday or Sunday, the first thing you might think of about, Boston or Philly are their notorious sports fans. But despite how important sports are for a city, not all cities are really created equal. In fact, some cities have way too many teams, and others that deserve a team have none. So I'm going to use math to highlight which cities got robbed when it comes to major sports. So here is all the US and Canadian cities with a metro over 1 million people. There's 62 of them, and the only pro sports cities with less than that are Winnipeg and Green Bay. So to get the numbers, I found the average population per team for every major pro sports city. There's 51 of them, and then I found the average for all those 51 cities, which is, my number, which is going to be the average population for one, team for a major sports city. And then I compared that average, which is 1.26 million per team, and then I compared that with the number of teams the city actually has, and then find out how many, they need or they are missing. And before I start, I should mention that I'm including the NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL, and MLS because they, 1, have similar and large numbers of teams, and 2, are popular enough to where the teams are in the largest population centers. Sorry CFL, and not sorry WNBA. And, while I understand that sports teams are popular outside of cities and can even expand to multiple whole states, measuring how many people are truly in a sports market is a nightmare and extremely subjective, and they overlap a lot. And, I'm not advocating for any areas losing or gaining sports teams just based on the numbers alone. This is, just what they say, and this is, a fun little experiment, and, other factors should definitely be taken into account. So number 10 is Hartford, Connecticut, which deserves 0.96 pro sports teams. So despite being close to New York City and Boston, Hartford has over 1.2 million people in its metro all on its own. Hartford was actually home to an NHL team joining from the rival WHA in 1979, but eventually they left for Raleigh, North Carolina in 97. The team left because it played in a shopping mall, was a small market, and struggled with attendance. Yes, they played in a shopping mall. All they have now is an AHL team and a AA baseball team, the Hartford Yard Goats. Connecticut has no pro sports teams. Now, number 9 is Louisville, Kentucky, which deserves 1.01 pro sports teams. Louisville is on the Ohio River and borders Indiana and is overshadowed by both Indianapolis and Cincinnati, despite being only around 100 miles away from both. With 1.3 million people, all they have is a AAA baseball team, and Louisville has a really rich sports history with figures like Muhammad Ali, Louisville Slugger, and the city's love basketball, which is also shared by the entire state of Kentucky, which has no pro sports teams. Number 8 is Richmond, Virginia, which deserves 1.03 pro sports teams. Virginia, despite being the 12th most populous state with 8.6 million people, has no pro sports teams. Even if you get rid of the DC Metro that sprawls into Virginia, they still have 5.6 million people without a pro sports team at all. And, don't even pretend that Virginians love DC or, the North Carolina teams. Richmond doesn't even have a second-tier pro sports team. The AAA team, the Braves, left in 2008, replaced by the AA Flying Squirrels. Number 7 is Dallas, Texas, which deserves 1.02 new pro sports teams. Dallas has one team in all the 5 major leagues, but it also has 7.6 million people, which is the 4th largest in the U.S. New York City, LA, Chicago, and the Bay Area get multiple teams. And by the numbers, Dallas apparently deserves another team. It is a huge metro area with sprawling suburbs. Maybe they'd get another NFL team, who knows. Number 6 is Montreal, Quebec, which deserves 1.38 pro sports teams. Montreal has nearly 4.3 million people, yet only an MLS and NHL team. The National Canadiens are also known by the shorthand Habs, and have the highest attendance by far of any NHL team, usually by over 10% of any other team, with over 21,000 people per game. The Habs are also one of the 2 most popular NHL teams, along with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and are the oldest continuous pro hockey team, being created in 1909, which is 8 years before the NHL was even created, and the famous Toronto Maple Leafs. From 1969 to 2004, they had the MLB's Montreal Expos, which left because of a terrible team with an old stadium and low attendance, and the culture divide between Anglophone Canada and the US and, Francophone Quebec. They also have an MLS team in CF Montreal, formerly the Montreal Impact. Number 5 is Virginia Beach, Virginia, which deserves 1.42 pro sports teams. The Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Newport News, Chesapeake, Hampton Roads Metro has just under 1.8 million people, and all they have is a AAA baseball team, the Tides, and the ECHL team, the Admirals, which was previously an AHL team. Richmond and Virginia Beach combine to approximately 2.5 pro sports teams, and it's not like they even support DC or North Carolina teams. They've gotten close to getting an NHL expansion team, luring the Charlotte Hornets, who went to New Orleans, luring the Montreal Expos, who went to Washington, D.C., and numerous other and less successful ventures. Get Southeast Virginia's pro sports team. Number 4 is San Diego, California, which deserves 1.61 pro sports teams. San Diego once had an NBA team in the 80s, which was ruthlessly stolen from them by a greedy owner to Los Angeles, and San Diego once had an NFL team from 1961 to 2016, which was ruthlessly stolen from them by a greedy owner to Los Angeles. Weird coincidence. Both teams are rather unloved and have few fans playing second fiddle in their markets to teams that are way more successful. At least they have the Padres, who finally beat the Dodgers. And yes, San Diego has an AHL team, but come on, 3.3 million people with just a baseball team. It won that from 2007 to 2019, didn't even make the playoffs, and from 2011 to 2019, didn't get more than 76 wins in a season. Give them back the Chargers, or the Clippers, or both, or a new team. Number 3 is Chicago, Illinois, which also deserves 1.61 pro sports teams. Chicago is the third largest U.S. city with a bit over 9.5 million people, and they have 6 pro sports teams, 1 in each league, and the unpopular White Sox. Chicago has a long history with sports, however I understand that by the numbers that they should already have another pro sports teams. But would they really support another NBA team, for example? The White Sox are so irrelevant and frankly sad both performance and attendance-wise. I get that the city is very large, but they already don't support the White Sox, so who's to say they would, be able to support another team in another league? I think that the new team should instead go to cities that haven't had one first. Number 2 is Houston, Texas, which deserves 1.63 pro sports teams. Houston is the 5th largest city with just over 7.1 million people, yet only has 4 pro sports teams. The only team they don't have is an NHL team. Houston has an absolute ton of minor league teams like the AAA Sugarland Space Cowboys, and semi-pro leagues including the XFL and USFL. Their NFL team was only founded in 2002 after Houston lost their Oilers to Nashville in '97. From 1994 to 2013, they had the very popular AHL Houston Astros. In their last year, they averaged 6,793, which was 7th out of 30 in the entire league. Yet, some arena squabbles with the Houston Rockets forced them to move to Des Moines, Iowa, where they had horrible attendance. No harm in giving them an NHL expansion or relocation, and they will get one if the Arizona Coyotes' new arena deal in Tempe falls through. Now, number 1 is Riverside. Okay. Something that I haven't been telling you. I excluded all cities whose metros are too close to other large metros. This is because it's difficult to argue that, for example, Riverside needs its own pro sports teams when they're so close to Los Angeles. I excluded all the math for these cities, but I thought that these close city pairs were just too close to call for them to need their own teams. Here are the 6. LA and the Inland Empire, Austin and San Antonio, Orlando and Tampa, DC and Baltimore. Foxborough teams are equidistant between Providence and Boston, so I gave only the Foxborough teams to Boston and then qualified Providence. And, most controversially, the entire Bay Area and Sacramento. Those are the only large enough cities I qualified this way. If I remove these qualifications, Riverside is number 2 at 3.64, Providence is 8 at 1.32, and San Antonio just misses out at 11 with 1.02. Alright now, the real number 1. Head and shoulders above every other city with 4.94 pro sports teams. Can you guess which one it is? What city is just so insanely robbed of sports? It's New York City. Yeah. With over 20 million people, not even their 11 pro sports teams, 2 in each league and 3 in the NHL are enough for them. They should expect 16 pro sports teams. Look, I get it's one of the largest cities in the world, but come on, you don't need 3 in each league, plus another in a 4th. I personally don't really like it when cities get more than one team, because it's almost like they're stealing them from smaller metros with large rural areas that could actually support teams really well, like, Virginia Beach, Richmond, Louisville, and, even Birmingham. So, take your 11 and keep it, New York City. As I said earlier, I don't think this should be the be-all, end-all for teams, as metros don't really count the large rural areas that are important. Sure, Kansas City isn't that big, but large swaths of Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, hell, even Iowa would be without a team, except for, in Denver, Dallas, Minneapolis, or St. Louis, which are pretty far away. For my money, give an NHL team to Houston, give some teams to San Diego, and give Southeast Virginia, Louisville, an NBA team. I won't comment on the rest because I might make future videos about relocating entire leagues if this one does well. Speaking of future videos, I'm planning a sequel to this one that covers the 10 cities with way too many sports teams per their size. So, if you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate any support as I'm a very small channel with 10 subs, and this video might get less views than that, so thank you for watching, if you are. Probably aren't.